Picture the world stage at the dawn of the 20th century, a time of booming industry, rapid technological advancement, and yet, beneath the surface, a simmering cauldron of tension and discontent. Europe was a continent on edge. Nationalism was on the rise, with countries vying for dominance and prestige. People were increasingly proud of their nations, and there was a growing sentiment that their country was superior to others. This intense patriotism often led to hostility towards other nations, further stoking the fires of tension. Militarism, too, was a significant factor. The Industrial Revolution had led to an arms race, with nations amassing advanced weapons and building powerful armies. This show of might was not just for defense, but was often used as a tool for intimidation and coercion, exacerbating the already high tensions. At the same time, imperial competition was rife. The scramble for colonies around the globe had created rivalries and discontent. Countries jostled for control over territories, resources, and trade routes, often leading to disputes and conflicts. And then, there was the complex system of alliances. Nations were entangled in a web of treaties and agreements, promising to defend each other in case of an attack. This meant that a conflict between two countries could easily drag others into the fray, setting the stage for a larger conflict. Amidst this tense atmosphere, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June of 1914 acted as the spark that ignited the powder keg. His death at the hands of a Serbian nationalist was the immediate cause that led to the outbreak of the First World War, a war that would soon engulf not just Europe, but the entire world. This tense atmosphere set the stage for the outbreak of a war that would engulf the world. In the summer of 1914, the trigger was pulled and the First World War began. It started with a single declaration of war. Austria-Hungary, aggrieved by the assassination of their Archduke, set their sights on Serbia. The Austro-Hungarian government held Serbia responsible, and thus, a spark was ignited that would set the world ablaze. But this was not a solitary battle between two nations. A complex web of alliances, treaties, and promises had been woven across Europe. These alliances, designed to maintain a delicate balance of power, now served to escalate the conflict. One by one, nations were drawn into the fray. Germany, bound by its dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, swiftly declared war on Russia and France. The United Kingdom, allied with France and Russia under the Entente Cordiale and the Anglo-Russian Agreement, could not stand by. They declared war on Germany, marking their official entry into the conflict. The early days of the war saw rapid movement of troops. Germany, operating under the Schlieffen Plan, sought to quickly defeat France by sweeping through neutral Belgium. This violation of Belgium's neutrality further outraged the international community, drawing more countries into the conflict. And then, the Western Front emerged. The fast-paced war of movement ground to a halt, replaced by a grueling stalemate of trench warfare. Soldiers dug into the earth, creating extensive networks of trenches. Here, they lived, fought, and too often, died. The land between enemy trenches, known as no man's land, became synonymous with the terror and bloodshed of war. The use of trenches was a strategic move, providing some protection from the enemy's fire. Yet it also encapsulated the brutality of the war, with neither side able to make significant advancements for long periods. This was not a war of quick victories and decisive battles. It was a war of attrition, of waiting and endurance. It was a war that spread across the globe, involving more than 30 nations and empires. The world had never seen a war of this scale before. As the war raged on, it grew in complexity and destruction. The Battle of the Marne, taking place in September of 1914, stands out as a significant turning point. The Allies, primarily French and British forces, squared off against the German First Army. A fierce struggle ensued, and in the end, the Allies halted the German advance into France. This battle marked the failure of Germany's Schlieffen Plan, meant to swiftly knock France out of the war. It signaled the beginning of trench warfare, a drawn-out and brutal aspect of the conflict. As the war continued, technological advancements began to reshape the battlefield. Tanks, first introduced by the British in 1916, played a crucial role. These iron behemoths, though slow and unwieldy, could traverse the difficult terrain of no man's land, withstanding machine gun fire and barbed wire. Their presence on the battlefield not only offered a psychological edge, but also provided critical support to infantry advances. The introduction of poison gas, however, was a darker side of technological progress. Initially used by the Germans in 1915, gas warfare was quickly adopted by all major belligerents. It introduced a terrifying new element to the war, causing agonizing deaths and lingering injuries among the soldiers. 1917 brought another pivotal moment as the United States entered the fray. The sinking of the Lusitania and the Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico, compelled the U.S. to join the Allies. Their entrance brought fresh troops and resources, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. But the cost of these advancements and strategic shifts was enormous. Millions of lives were lost, and countless others were irrevocably changed. The landscape of Europe was scarred by the relentless fighting, and societies were shaken to their core. The war was reshaping the world in ways that no one could have predicted. In 1918, after 4 long years of bloodshed, the end was finally in sight. It was in November of that year when an armistice was signed, effectively marking the cessation of hostilities on the Western Front. This was no simple ceasefire. It was a moment that signaled the end of a war that had ravaged the world, leaving millions dead and nations in ruins. The armistice was signed in a railway carriage in Compiègne, France, in the early hours of November 11th. Representatives from Germany and the Allies met in secret. Negotiations were tense, but eventually an agreement was reached. The guns fell silent, the fighting stopped, and for the first time in 4 years, peace was more than just a distant dream. However, this armistice was not a formal end to the war. That would come later, with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. The world's leaders gathered in the Palace of Versailles in France to negotiate the terms of peace. The palace was a symbol of absolute monarchy and the old world order, an apt setting for a treaty that would reshape the world. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919. It was a document of more than 200 pages, filled with clauses and stipulations. But its essence was clear. Germany and Austria-Hungary were to accept the blame for the war and were to pay reparations for the damage they had caused. This was a controversial decision, one that sowed seeds of resentment and discontent, seeds that would, in time, grow into the roots of another war. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles marked the official end of the First World War. It was a moment of relief, of triumph, but also of reflection. The world had seen the horrors of war on an unprecedented scale, and the hope was that such a catastrophe would never happen again. The First World War had finally come to an end, but its effects would be felt for generations. The First World War left an indelible mark on human history. This cataclysmic event, like a stone cast into the pond of time, caused ripples that would shape the world in ways unimaginable. The aftermath of the war saw a major reshaping of the world map. Empires crumbled, new nations were born, and borders were redrawn. Lands once under the control of the Ottoman Empire, for instance, were divided into the modern Middle Eastern states we know today. Notably, the war also marked the rise of the United States as a global power. While Europe was ravaged by the war, the U.S. prospered, supplying armaments and provisions to the Allies. By the war's end, it had transformed from a debtor nation into the world's leading creditor, establishing its economic dominance. But perhaps the most significant legacy of the First World War was the seeds of resentment it sowed in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, placed full blame on Germany and imposed heavy reparations. This led to economic hardship and political instability, paving the way for the rise of extremism and, eventually, the Second World War. In the wake of the devastation, the world sought to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. This led to the establishment of the League of Nations, the precursor to today's United Nations. Despite its ultimate failure to prevent the Second World War, the League set a precedent for international cooperation and conflict resolution. As we look back on the First World War, we are reminded of the profound ways it has shaped our world. From the redrawing of borders to the rise of new powers and the birth of international cooperation, its impact is etched into every facet of modern history. Thus concludes our journey through the First World War, a conflict that shaped the course of the 20th century.